Welcome to another episode of the Attic Fables podcast, where together we learn how to face the ups and downs of life with faith and confidence. In today's episode, I'm going to be continuing my series on the origins of life. If you didn't watch the first two videos, then I encourage you to watch those videos first before you view this one, because each video builds on the previous episode. As I mentioned in the first two videos, we should not discount the evidence for an old earth simply because we cling to a particular view or interpretation of Genesis chapter 1 for a young earth. We need to look at the evidence, and if the evidence suggests that the earth is very old, then we need to revise our interpretation, our theory for a young earth, and our interpretation of Genesis chapter 1. Similar to what happened during the Copernicus revolution, when Copernicus said, no, the sun does not revolve around the earth revolves around the sun. And at that time it was difficult for many Christians to accept that theory, but eventually, in the face of evidence, scientific and naturalistic evidence, Christians capitulated, revised their theories, revised their interpretation of the Bible to allow for a heliocentric solar system, a solar system in which the sun is the center, not the earth. And if the evidence shows that the earth is very, very old, we need to be willing to take a second look at how we understand the creation story in Genesis chapter 1. Now, one of the reasons why we might want to consider to reevaluate our understanding of Genesis chapter 1, especially if you believe that the earth is very young, as some have said, less than 10,000 years old. One of the reasons why we might want to revise our understanding is because of the evidence of creators. Meteorites and asteroids hit the earth and created huge impact craters on the earth. Now, on the earth, there's not a lot of evidence of how many meteors or asteroids there were at a particular time in the history of the earth, how many there were, because of on the earth we have plate tectonics, and we have the erosion of the environment, of the geology. And so erosion and plate tectonics have erased much of the evidence for these meteor impacts and these asteroid impacts. If, however, we look at the moon, for example, which you can see some of the craters with the naked eye by looking at the moon, if we look at these craters from meteors and asteroids on the planet Mercury and on the planet Mars, we see that there were millions of these impacts. Millions of craters are in existence. Now the moon and Mercury and Mars don't have the same conditions of the earth. There doesn't seem to be this volcanic activity that involves the plate tectonics. We don't see subsidence. We don't see plates of the crust converging and creating mountains. We don't see erosion from the weather like rain and wind. like we see on Earth. And so on Earth, the evidence for the craters, for millions of asteroids and meteors hitting the Earth, has mostly been erased because of plate tectonics and erosion. But on Mars and Mercury and on our moon, we see millions of these craters, places where huge rocks came out from outer space and smashed into the moon and smashed into Mars and smashed into Mercury. Well, the same happened on Earth. These asteroids and meteors smashed into Earth. The evidence on Earth, however, as I mentioned earlier, has mostly disappeared. There's a few craters. Some of you might have even seen some of the crater, the famous Meteor crater in Arizona. But most of the impacts have been eroded away over time. And so when we consider how many millions of these rocks flying from outer space, smashing into the moon, smashing into Mars, smashing into the Earth, and now most of the evidence is gone on Earth. How did that happen? How is it that on Earth there's very little evidence of these millions of space objects, space rocks, smashing into the Earth? Well, what happened to them? Well, young Earth creationists, those Christians who believe that the Earth is very young, say that these impacts, if you want to call it a bombardment, many scientists call these meteor bombardments, that happened many millions of years ago. Young Earth creationists say, no, not millions of years ago. The Earth is not millions of years old. This happened during perhaps the third or fourth day of creation before life began on the fifth and sixth days of creation, according to that young Earth interpretation of creation, Genesis chapter 1. They say that these millions of meteors and asteroids hit the Earth perhaps on the third or fourth day of creation. And they were the evidence for them, all the craters from these impacts were erased during Noah's flood, during the Great Flood, the worldwide flood that we read about in Genesis chapters 6, 7, and 8. Or perhaps these meteors hit during the flood. And so, since the earth was covered by water from the rains and the water that enveloped the earth and covered the earth during Noah's flood, that there's no craters today because they hit the ocean, they hit the waters, they didn't hit the land. And so either they were washed away in the flood. If they happened before the flood, they washed away in the flood, or they simply didn't leave any evidence because it happened during the flood. And so that's the explanation that young Earth creationists give. There's only a few problems with these scenarios. The first problem with thinking that these meteors hit the Earth during the first few days of creation is that we know that meteors hit, let's say, on the moon or on planet Mars. Meteors and asteroids, they hit, they leave the craters, and then later we see evidence that volcanoes came up, magma flowed from the interior of the moon and from the interior of Mars, and lava flowed over the craters. So you have these craters that were made by the meteors, sometimes being obscured or marred or overlapped by volcanic craters and lava. And so that did not happen in just 1 or 2 days. We know that the lava flows, you can map the lava flows and see how they overlap the pre-existing meteor craters. The meteor craters are already there. And then a volcano erupts and lava flows over them. We know that this would have taken more than 1 or 2 days. It might have, this process might have gone on for hundreds of years or even longer. And so that creates a huge problem for young Earth creationists. The fact that you can see the craters on the moon or on Mars, and yet they've been overlapped by volcanic activity, lava flows. The second is that if these meteors hit on, say, the 3rd or 4th day of creation, then life would not have been able to get started on the 5th and 6th days of creation. And the reason is because these meteors and asteroids hitting the Earth would have created huge dust storms. The Earth would have been enveloped in dust, and the dust would have obscured the sunlight. The sun would not have been sufficient for plant life, and it would be difficult to breathe the oxygen for the animals and for the humans. Of course, in the creation account, we read that man was created on the 6th day. Well, he would have died, he would have suffocated from the dust created by these millions of meteors and asteroids and all the dust that would have been flying up and in the atmosphere. So that creates an insurmountable problem for young Earth creationists. They simply don't have an answer, except to say perhaps God somehow shielded the Earth from these millions of asteroids, and only a few hit here and there, but not like on the moon or on Mars. Well, yeah, that's a very convenient miracle. There's no evidence in the Bible that God did such a thing. There's no record of this bombardment or protection of the Earth during the bombardment. So that's simply a kind of a cheap workaround to try to explain how this could have happened. Now, what if the meteors hit during Noah's flood? The Earth is flooded with water, and meteors hit the water, and so it's not going to be any evidence. Yeah, you can see that, let's say this happened during the flood. Well, it happened, far away on the moon, far away on Mars, and it left the craters, but there's no craters on Earth because of Noah's flood, and these meteors and asteroids just simply hit the water and left no evidence of their impact. Well, there's another huge problem for this scenario, and that is that if millions of asteroids are hitting all these solar objects, the moon, Mars, Mercury, and the Earth, young Earth creationists do not dispute the fact of this bombardment of millions of asteroids and meteors. They don't dispute. Some say God protected the Earth, but many others say no, there was no big miracle where God did that. The asteroids hit the Earth, but it was a flood, and so they just hit the ocean and didn't cause any impact craters. Well, the problem with that is that if these asteroids, let's just take one for example, a large asteroid, let's say that it's several meters in size. It would have caused a splash, and from this splash, water would have ejected up into the atmosphere, probably at least 10 kilometers. Most scientists agree that there would have been a huge splash from this asteroid, and then there would have been the subsequent waves. It wouldn't create gigantic tidal waves, but they could have, especially near the impact center of the impact, could have been waves as high as 400 meters. And so you have water spraying up into the atmosphere, and you have huge waves close to the impact, and that's just one. So you have Noah's Ark floating on this stormy ocean, rain pouring down, the earth being flooded, and now there's all these meteors. Thousands and thousands and hundreds of thousands. If you look at the moon and Mars and Mercury, you see the evidence, hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of these space rocks flying through space and crashing into the earth. Crashing into, if we think that it happened during Noah's flood, into the ocean. Sending water shooting up many kilometers into the sky and causing these huge waves. One after another, after another, after another. Thousands, thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, perhaps a million of these. Noah's Ark, Noah and his family would not have survived. They could not have survived such a cataclysmic event. They would have been obliterated. Their ship would have been, the ark would have sank. And everyone and all the animals would have drowned. There's no way. It's impossible to think that they could have survived in such conditions. The other problem is that all this water vapor shooting up into the sky, into the stratosphere, would have created conditions on the earth that would have made life on earth very difficult. All that water vapor in the atmosphere, again affecting the climate on earth, would have drastically changed the earth's climate for many, many years. And there's no evidence that anything like this happened. Noah comes out onto the off the ark, and he comes out of the ark and lets the animals out, and he performs these sacrifices, and everything seems hunky-dory. Everything seems calm and peaceful, and there's a beautiful rainbow indicating a peaceful environment. The aftermath of a huge bombardment of asteroids hitting the ocean would have created chaos. The atmosphere would have been enveloped in this cloud of water vapor, and it would have drastically changed the climate on Earth, making life impossible. And so we come to the belief that the young Earth creationists simply don't have explanations. They don't have answers for what happened to the Earth during this meteor bombardment. The only reasonable explanation is that these meteors hit many, many, many thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of years ago, because we don't see the evidence. Earth does not look like Mars. Earth does not look like the moon. Plate tectonics have changed the surface of the Earth. Erosion has changed the surface of the Earth. There's a few more recent impact craters that are still evident today, but very, very few in comparison with those that we see on the other planets and on the moon. And the reason is because over long periods of time, these craters have disappeared under the earth, been buried through sediment, or washed away by erosion. Well, I hope that you've enjoyed today's episode of the Attic Fables podcast. Until next time, remember, no matter who you are, no matter where you're from, no matter what you've done, God loves you.